Hello, and welcome to Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Today on Indiana Issues, the governor unveils his legislative agenda. Also, Indiana teachers want more pay, and Donald Trump, some new approval rating numbers are out here in the state of Indiana. And join us from the Edge Media Studios here in downtown Indianapolis. To talk about all this is our panel of political pundits experts, our good friend Libertarian Mark Rutherford. Mark, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Abdul.
Democrat Jamar Cobb-Denard. Jamar, thank you for being with us, hanging out today.
Thanks.
From the Statehouse file now, went back to work just a little bit. Our good friend, former Andy Starr reporter, Beth Schneider. Beth, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And, of course, our good friend, Republican State Senator Jamar. Jim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's go ahead and start this out. And, Jim, we'll start with you. The governor unveiling his legislative agenda. It includes things like he wants to increase pay for teachers. We'll get to in a little bit. Keep the surplus, more money for DCS. More for opioid abuse and treatment, also some quality of life issues. Will he be able to get that agenda through? As you can see on the screen there, also child welfare, school safety, and expand rural broadband, bias crime legislation. Will the governor be able to get that through the chambers controlled by your party?
Well, I think the agenda is wonderful. It's a definite. It's just a really great, robust agenda, and I think we've got a chance to pass a lot of the ideas that he's got. Probably the bias crimes is going to be the most difficult, but that's all about language and it's all about controversy. But a lot of the information in the agenda makes common sense, and Eric Holcomb has done a great job of accepting the challenge of being governor and really leading in a commonsensical way.
Let me jump over to Jamar because one of the things, the criticisms come from some of members of the Democrats in the House and Senate has been, it's nice, but it's not necessarily bold. I mean, like I said, we'll get to the teacher pay in just a bit, but just overall, your thoughts on what Eric Holcomb wants to do. Is it bold and daring, or is it just more caretaking and being on cruise control?
Well, this is Eric Holcomb at his best, and it's caretaking, and that's been the tenor of his administration since day one. I do agree with Senator Merritt that the bias crimes legislation will be tough to pass. There's already pushback against it and has been since Eric Holcomb mentioned it earlier this year, and again coming back to it this fall. Some representatives and senators have been talking about it. The other thing that creates an issue is keeping the surplus. So yes, there's the teacher pay issue. Yes, there's the opioid issue, but we also have roads across the state of Indiana that are in terrible repair. And we're not just talking about the city roads, but some of our federal infrastructure that's taken care of by the state. We've got to start spending down some of that money that's just sitting there collecting interest so that we have a great state that attracts great people and great businesses.
Is it, Mark, should the state, piggyback what Jamar said, tap into its surplus for some of its needs? For example, the revenue may not be as much as we thought. DCS is going to need about $268 million for caseworkers to deal, with the impact of the opioid abuse. Schools want more money, and the revenue is maybe about $350 million in new revenue altogether.
You have to be really careful with the what some people call the surplus. Some call it rainy day fund. But to me, one of the hallmarks of Indiana has the ability to keep maintaining that. So you better be very careful about diving into it and figuring out what the true priorities are. Being in the General Assembly is tough, especially in budget year, because everybody needs more money, and lots of people have good reasons for it, but you have to be careful and concerned because there will be a rainy day sometime, and that you need that because the economy just tanked for a little while. And that's kept Indiana being a leading state financially in many regards, and I think they should be very careful about diving into it.
Mary Beth, you covered the legislature for years. We've seen good budget years and bad budget years. My running joke is what former Senator Luke Kendall used to say, the chairman of appropriations, like Abdul always loved tough budget times. That way I could always tell everybody no. and then we were done with the discussion. When you got good times, that's when things get a little tricky. How much is the budget going to be a factor on all the things the governor wants to accomplish?
Well, it's going to be a factor on almost everything other than something like bias crimes, which is not money dependent. I think the agenda was kind of meh. It's not bad. It's not good. It is keeping Indiana on a good footing going forward, but it's not particularly bold. But I think that's because of the economic realities here. They in the past 2 years have put in nearly $300 million more into DCS because of real problems addressing the needs of at-risk children. So the new budget going forward, you already have to figure that's your baseline. You've got to fund that. That does not leave very much money to do some big, bold new program. So I don't fault the governor for that, but I wouldn't be shooting off fireworks either.
And maybe this is a position of how they're packaging this too, right? So just calling these items what they are is one thing, but when Mayor Ballard did the infrastructure plan a number of years ago, he wrapped it around a sexy name and put some marketing behind it, and people got behind it. Now, even though we did all this work, and now as I'm talking to road and engineering professionals, that was kind of just patchwork and glazing some icing on some real issues that were underneath. But the way that they marketed it and packaged it and communicated it made it sound bold, and maybe that's what the Holcomb administration needs.
So
Well, we have-
so to call it Indy Works.
But Jamar, by the way, Mary Beth, I'm so glad you're back in the State House. The
Thank
State
you.
House file is an outstanding place for you, and
have
you're
some
just going to make it
great
even
students.
better. Great place. Jamar, when your comment about infrastructure before, I think we spent something like $1 billion and had at least 100 projects statewide on different Indiana highways, and there are a lot of people that were complimenting and complaining because they had vehicles and they had road closures. So there's a lot of money being spent there. But Eric Holcomb is somebody that is getting the job done. And what I mean by that is you look at IEDC. I mean, that has nothing really to do with the legislature. We are bringing jobs to Indiana. And also the next level workforce development. That's not a real sexy topic, but it is the heart and soul of what is going on in Indiana. And maybe bold is not the right word, but it's definitely effective.
One time to take a moment to talk about the other part of the governor's agenda, which is, of course, the issue of bias crimes. The governor's saying, we need to do it. He kind of says it's time to get Indiana off the naughty list with the holiday season and on the nice list, with the state being only one of 5 states that does not have bias crimes legislation. And it looks like if they do it, it won't be a separate offense, but just more of a sort of a sentence enhancer with somebody convicted of the underlying crime. Is that, or will that be enough, Mary Beth, do you think, to maybe ease some of the fears that it's not a separate offense but a sentence enhancer?
Possible, but Eric Holcomb is going to have to really sell this in a way he has not demonstrated so far. If there's any issue that I've heard about in the legislature longer than broadband access on his agenda, it's bias crimes. That was an issue back in the 90s when I first started covering the legislature. And the reasons it didn't pass then are still the reasons it may not pass today. You have people on the left who are concerned about freedom of speech issues. Then you have people on the right who are concerned that this is going to make it a crime to hold an opinion against somebody who's gay. Now, I think it is, I agree with the governor. I think it's time to do this. But boy, he is going to need to demonstrate political skills that so far he has not had to use.
Jamar, is this one of those things that you can only get it done, or are you sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't? If you leave out one particular, I know the speaker had mentioned a couple weeks ago about gender identity. That might be an issue for some lawmakers, but if you don't include gender identity, you may lose some other folks. Is this one of those things that you're going to lose somebody regardless? Just try to lose as few people as possible.
That's an interesting spin on this.
Of course, that's what I do for a living.
Right. The spin doctor. What Mary Beth said is really correct. It's going to take a lot of political acumen to get this done, especially getting it done from the right.
Yeah.
And being able to communicate this in a way that brings why this is important to conservative House and Senate members and also voters. But on the left, it may not be as tough of a sell because when you have swastikas on synagogues and you've got people in communities on the north side fighting against Muslims being in their neighborhood, that's not a crime. But the next step is what's happened across the country with bias and hate crimes being proliferated against minorities. So as a state, we have to get out of that bottom 10%, right? So being the last 5 that doesn't have something, or being the bottom 5 or bottom 10 in education or infrastructure or whatever it is, we've got to aspire higher and just get the job done.
Jim, how of a tough sell is it going to be for some of your more conservative colleagues in the Senate?
Well, Mary Beth, as you recall, you remember it was 10 hours in that Senate chamber when we had that debate in the 90s. And so this has been around for a long time. And anybody that's watched the Senate, Senator Glick and others have been working on this for the last couple of years, and with really not a whole lot going on in the House of Representatives. Let me give you an example. I have a bill, and I have a bill the last couple of years, and Abdul, you know this, that I want police officers 24/7 have the same protection that they have on duty, off duty, and their families as well. So if somebody takes a swat at them in public because they're a police officer and they're having dinner with their family, that ought to be against a police officer rather than somebody that is just in plain clothes. And so you can form hate in the idea of that in so many different ways. I think it gets done this year. I think there's got to. It's always, these issues are always the devil in the details, and the detail meaning text and language in the Indiana Code itself. And we've demonstrated that we have an interest in working on this issue, and we will again. You probably saw that Senator Alting has already introduced a piece of legislation along with Senator Bahacek. So we're ready to go. We're ready to talk about it.
Jim, can I ask you something?
Yes.
Will Brian Bosma give it a hearing if it passes the Senate?
You know, I haven't asked him that, but Mary Beth, we were in a debate, and it was Representative Houston, Representative Bosma, and myself during the campaign. And Speaker Bosma was not negative about it. And I do believe that he, from the comments we've heard of recent in the media, I don't think I think it has a chance, and I think it will get a hearing, and the public will be able to get their word out in the House of Representatives.
Now, Senator Merritt, you just sliced this thing with razor cutter in terms of what the real issue of this could be. So we obviously want to protect our police, and we want to make sure that they and their families, because of the service that they're providing to our community, aren't at risk. But also, in terms of resist to police officers, one of the defenses is that it was political speech and it's part of their First Amendment right. So this will be really tricky as it works through the Statehouse.
It's always tricky, and I've run into that trick before.
Let me get Mark Rutherford in. Mark, your thoughts on where this bias crime legislation may or may not go?
Well, there's strong pressure to pass it. That doesn't necessarily mean it should be passed. And the issue is always unintended consequences. My opinion is that there was ways to deal with bias that's out there, that certain people were not treated very well by the court system. Judges failed to do that in sentencing. Prosecutors failed to raise it in sentencing. There's just a lot of failures out there, and just a broad indictment of the system that it could have been dealt with. So now we're in a position, and we see other states with it and see what's happening. And is it misused or not? The question is, we're going to start getting more and more litigation about the free speech issues. We're seeing it with the resisting police ones right now. And I understand the resisting the police statute, but one of the downfalls of it is, where's the line between you're making a political statement and where are you just being a jerk?
Has this been a problem, though, in the 45 states that have it? Because I don't think it has.
Well, yeah, there have been some problems with it. There are court cases out there, but it's a pretty popular thing, and I get that. People want that because deep down, we all try to be good people, and we think that this is being a jerk by doing what you're doing.
But isn't fundamentally, if you think about this, we have to take a break real quick here, Thomas, in just a second, our director. Is this that for bias crimes to work, you have to be convicted of the underlying non-biased crime offense, whether it's assault, battery, whatever.
Have to have done something.
And before the other part kicks in. And also, just so everybody knows, threats and intimidation, regardless, have never been considered protected speech by the courts. So regardless of whether somebody's a police officer, African American, or transgender, you can't just threaten and intimidate individuals. You're watching Indiana Issues from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis, the public affairs program, where we try to go through the big issues of the day. We're going to take ourselves a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about one of the other big items on the governor's agenda. That is the issue of teacher pay and how exactly should that happen. You're watching Indiana Issues. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. We're talking today with our political panel about the upcoming 2019 legislative session. Governor Eric Holcomb unveiling his agenda this week. Our panel includes our good friend, Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Jamar Cobb-Denard, Merritt Beth Schneider, former reporter for the United Star, and now with the Statehouse File, and Republican State Senator Jim Merritt. The issue of teacher pay, also a big deal at the legislature. It almost seemed to sort of come out of nowhere, so to speak. The governor says he wants to increase teacher pay, but not immediately. He says, let's look at this over a 2 to 3 year window to figure out how to do it right. Democrats say that's not enough. We need something now. ISTA saying, hey, we need to see some concrete steps. The State Teachers Association. Mary Beth Schneider, let me start with you. Where do you see this issue of teacher pay going?
I think they are going to have to do something. I think partly in the short term, and partly because Governor Eric Holcomb stood up at a legislative conference and said there would be short-term and long-term. And I still do not know why he said that, because we sat through their long briefing on the agenda where they made it pretty clear they wanted to study it, see the best ways to make this happen, because teacher pay is so often decided more by what happens at the local level than by what happens at the Statehouse, and they wanted to compare other states. And then he said how he was being mischaracterized and there was short-term and long-term. I still do not know what he meant by short-term. Sometimes Eric Holcomb is his own worst enemy. He is so good in so many ways at things, but apparently being clear and forceful is not one of them.
Let me ask you, Jim Merritt, how do you do the teacher pay issue? Because I argue, like Mary Beth just said, so much of it is locally decided, locally controlled. The school districts that set the pay. They negotiate contracts with teachers unions. I mean, to me, it's a local issue. And if you want to raise pay, do what IPS just did. Have a referendum.
Well, Mary Beth will remember we've been working on this since 1991 when I entered legislature, probably a long time before that. And the legislature does not want to be an enormous school board. That is what I know. We need to leave the school boards alone and allow them to do their job. We have tried so many different ways to get money. And they used to say get money into the classroom and get funding to the classroom. And what I think that was saying was get it around the superintendents and into the classroom for teacher pay. I think we're going to have more teacher pay. This is an issue that is happening around the country, and it hasn't happened in a violent way here. But we can't have teachers walking out of classrooms where we've seen. And I do believe that we will have teacher pay is job number one this year. Among many other job number one, I guess. But bottom line is that it is the bottom line. Teachers are expected more so than ever before in their responsibilities, and we have to respond to that.
Jamar, how do you increase teacher pay from the state level without the state turning into sort of the Uber school board? Because so many of these issues, like I said, are decided, locally. I had a conversation this past week with Teresa Meredith of the State Teachers Association, and my thing was, hey, you guys sit across the table from each other, you negotiate these agreements. Maybe you really want the state, getting, in that level of involvement.
First, regardless of how this is done, statewide, at the state level, local level, we've got to do better for our students. across the state, in rural areas and suburban areas and in urban areas as well. And the big key to that is this teacher pay issue. They may not walk out of the schools, but they may not walk into the schools to begin with. Or at the end of the year, they're looking for another state or another jurisdiction to go to where they can actually get paid what they're worth. Because teachers they work incredibly hard, and they build our workforce. They build our talent. They keep our kids out of, all of these things flow out of our schools. So this has to be priority number one. And I think the best way to do it is to make sure that the legislature earmarks some dollars. And I don't know how to do this through the agencies. Jim,
It's
you're
difficult.
a master of this, but earmarks it so it's designated for a purpose, but allows the school districts to decide
Well,
how
Jamar,
it gets
we've done that with grants. We've done that in a lot of different ways, and we still haven't found the magic yet, but we need to.
Let me get you. Go ahead, Mark.
Yes, the question is, does the General Assembly want to become a giant school board? Because right now, everything that I see the Indiana General Assembly does, they do it with good intent, it looks like to me, and it's not working. And the way it's set up now is there are funds that are set up and some restrictions on the funds for schools, but it's the local school board that makes the decision. It's their superintendents, et cetera, and they're not keeping up. Now, is it a problem that they're not very good at negotiating with the unions? Is it the unions aren't very good at negotiating with the school boards? I just don't know. I know enough about it to say some stuff about it, but that's the real issue is somehow the money's not getting to the teachers. I've been around teachers all my life. My mother was one, and they work hard, and they spend their own money in classes, and bless them for doing that. I don't know why they do that because I don't think they get compensated and rewarded for doing that right now.
And here's $1 million question for me is over the past 10 years, absent the early recession, we've seen an increase in the money that's schools get because the lawmakers have increased student funding every year. The number of students in Indiana has stayed relatively flat over the past 10 years, but the number of teachers have dropped. So my question is, somebody help me out here. If schools are getting more money, the number of students are staying relatively flat, and the number of teachers are going down, where is this extra cash? Where's the extra money going?
That's the question.
Who's
getting it? Somebody's getting it.
All I remember is being a little kid asking my father for more money. He's like, whoa, what did you do with the last bit of money that I gave? Also, my father was an accountant, too, which really didn't help matters much.
I want to disagree with something that's been said by almost everybody here in that the legislature has not acted sometimes as a super school board. They certainly have. Mm-hmm. They affected the teacher bargaining power. They cut pay back and not maybe intentionally, but they cut a whole month's worth of payments back in, I don't remember now, it was 2008, 2009. It was when the recession hit, that's right. And that money was never made up. They make decisions on what classes they have to teach. They make decisions on how many hours the kids have to take for diplomas and different ones. They make decisions on what schools open and where by deciding on charter schools and vouchers. And so they definitely have. And so while maybe that's not ideal, I do think that they've shown the ability to do it when they have the political will to do it, and I think they can do it in the teacher pay.
And don't forget about the takeovers, too. Muncie, Gary, those are some of the most contested pieces of legislation because the state and the state legislature was acting like a super school board. So the legislature has to be careful in how
you
this
get
is handled.
accused of union busting sometimes. If you're a super school board, you're throwing money right at the teachers.
And the buildings are fantastic that are out there, yet they can't put teachers in there right now because they're not paying enough. The school formula, I think, incentivizes these great, nice buildings. And my mother went to a one-room schoolhouse, and it's amazing the people she was with. They became FBI agents, they became superintendent of schools, et cetera, et cetera. They did quite well. I think the focus should be on the quality of teaching and a building that's good enough.
Well, many of the school buildings are not actually good enough.
There are some that aren't good enough, but a lot of them are way too good, in my opinion.
And also something else, I know a conversation we got to have before moving to the next topic is the issue of consolidation and collaboration. We have so many school districts that have, less than 1,000 kids all together and X number of buildings. You just got to wonder, are the resources going toward the right place? You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz of IndyPolitics.org. We got about 5 minutes left, ladies and gentlemen. I want to get your Donald Trump number of Hoosiers. Morning Consult, a new poll out showing the number of Hoosiers not happy with Donald Trump has actually increased by double digits. It was 35%. If we can throw that graphic up there at the beginning of the year. Right now, in November, it is 45%. Meanwhile, its approval numbers have stayed relatively flat. What does this mean? What does this tell you about the Donald Trump status sort of here in the state of Indiana? I'll ask anyone.
Well, I think that that doesn't say a whole lot other than, most presidents go through those dips. I think this next year, when he's got to deal with the Democrat House, that will tell us a lot about the presidency and what's going to go forward. And a lot of times when President Clinton was in office, he dealt with a Republican Congress, and many people think good things came from it. So this next year it will be quite a challenge.
As we're showing on the screen there, from the little back and forth that Mr. Trump had with Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and you see sort of Vice President Mike Pence sort of looked like a little kid watching his mom and dad fight each other at the dinner table, looking very uncomfortable. Jamar, is this what we're going to be seeing a lot more of? And please do not use the Mike Pence elf on the shelf meme. I've seen enough of those.
You stole my joke. What is Pence going to be doing tomorrow? Nefarious elf. Kidding. So I think this type of thing is exactly why Pence's disapproval ratings have dropped. So the weird thing about those stats is that the approval ratings have stayed relatively the same, but the disapproval, there's a bigger gap. And my thought here is that it comes from the Mueller investigation and just constant drama. Week after week after week after week. So his supporters are still staying by him, but people are getting tired and they just want results.
Yes.
Can I go back to the approval ratings for a minute here? +7 in Indiana is bad news because he was considerably higher than that back on November of 2016, and he is now underwater in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. He's still not underwater in Ohio. I almost said Ohio. So +7 in Indiana, if you are Donald Trump, is bad news nationally.
And +7, by the way, is the same margin that Mike Braun won over Joe Donnelly.
But I want to point out, and this is what I really don't give much bearing to approval numbers until we get closer to election. I mean, it could affect other people next year in the municipal races here. And that is, the death of George Bush reminded me of this. And that is, he was riding real high until the end of his first term, and then it plummeted and he lost. So you just don't know what's going to happen. But what I've observed in talking with people about Trump, and these are people who like Trump generally as president, he has sharp edges, and he's beginning to wear on them too, the way he conducts himself. That's something that I don't know what effect that will have long term, but right now people are beginning to have some fatigue by it, in my opinion.
And unlike George H.W. Bush, or frankly, almost any president that I can think of, he has never been over 50%, not nationwide, and except in the Rasmussen poll, which is always an outlier. So I think that it's much harder for him to turn this around than it is for a president. Bill Clinton was low, and then he finished high. George H.W. was really high, finished low. H.W. has improved over time, but as you say, he had, and it was all because of policy doing with the Read My Lips tax pledge.
I want to go to our last topic real quick here as we wind down the conversation, our predictions, prognostications. What are you guys looking at? What are you paying attention to out in the universe of political ether? Mark Rutherford, we'll start with you.
Oh, my gosh. I'm trying to figure out the General Assembly and how they're going to divvy up the money. I'm not so sure yet. I mean, but one thing that I always observe is I always hear every session that there's not enough money, we don't have enough money. It doesn't matter how much money is there. But we've got this real problem with Child Protective Services, whatever it's called now, that it has to be dealt with. The agency needs work. It's got a valuable mission, but it's just costing a lot of money to try to fix it, and how we're going to deal with it. I don't want to become another school situation where everything we attempt doesn't work and it just takes more and more money. Where did the money go? It's got to be dealt with.
Jamar?
Number one, national jockeying for the president's race in 2020. It starts January, February. So that's big on my radar now. Number two, and more important, especially to our region, is what's going to happen with these municipals. I'm hearing from Republican friends and Democrat friends that there is going to be a battle, basically, against old guard, new guard, and I want to see how this thing shakes out.
Mary Beth?
On the state level, I'm watching Eric Holcomb. he still always doesn't seem comfortable in his role of being really forceful, but he's got, I think, so much talent. And he relates to Hoosiers, I think, really well. I think he can do this, but he's got to have some big results to show for it, not just incremental, next level, next level, next level. It might be good to come up with a new slogan. On the national front, the Mueller investigation, what happens to Donald Trump? Will he even be on the ballot in 2020?
Jim Merritt?
Well, it's I'm watching Todd Young, and his being in charge of the Republican Senate Committee is a big deal. I think he'll be around the country. Speaking out on the Saudi Arabia situation, he's come along, and I'm very proud of him. And he's a Marine, and I just think he's an outstanding member of the U.S. Senate very quickly. And second of all, Rod Bray. I think Rod Bray has got a great start. We've got our leadership team.
President of the Senate.
Yes, I'm sorry, President Pro Tem of the Senate. And Senator Long left us in good shape, and Senator Bray is going to continue it.
Keep an eye on House Ways and Means Committee co-chair Todd Houston, going to be rising to the top and possibly put himself in line for speakership should Brian Bosma decide, 2-4 years down the road to step down. That is going to do it for our edition of Indiana Issues, coming to you from the Edge Media Studios. Our guests today have been Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Jamar Cobb-Denard, Mary Beth Schneider of the Statehouse File, and our good friend Republican State Senator Jim Merritt. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz. Special thanks to our friends here at Edge Media Studios in downtown Annapolis. Thanks for being with us, and we'll talk to you next time on Indiana Issues.
Well done.
All right.
Hey, Jim.
Well, thank you. Thank you all.
I will.